Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Literature Channel. I'm Tim Wilson. This is our second lecture on the Odyssey. In today's lecture, we're going to focus on a bit more detail in books 1 to 4, often referred to as the Telemachy, since it focuses on the activities of Odysseus's son Telemachus back on Ithaca. So let's get started. Let's begin with the opening lines. It's the opening lines of the epic, often referred to as the proem, go as follows in the Robert Fagel's translation. Sing to me of the man muse, the man of twists and turns, driven time and again off course. Once he had plundered the hallowed heights of Troy. Many cities of men he saw and learned their minds. Many pains he suffered, heartsick on the open sea, fighting to save his life and bring his comrades home. Then every god took pity, all except Poseidon. He raged on, seething against the great Odysseus till he reached his native land. So we see at the beginning a couple of things I want to highlight. We see in the first lines this invocation of the muse of epic poetry. So sing to me of the muse. So the bard is requesting that the muse, the goddess, inspire him to be able to tell of events that normal humans would not have access to. And this is a typical epic convention that we'll see in every epic, the Iliad, the Odyssey, Virgil's Aeneid. We see it again in Paradise Lost by John Milton, centuries later. So we talked the first lecture about this line about the man of twists and turns. In Greek, it's polytropos. Odysseus is a man of many turns, and we talked about how this defines his character in a literal sense of having been driven off course and his many turns of his wanderings, but also in terms of his crafty mind, but also his deceptive mind. He's one who's able to craft lies that will advance his ends, and we'll see that in effect, especially when he returns to Ithaca in the final 12 books. And then I've highlighted as well this line focusing on how his end goal was to bring him and his comrades home. And we talked quickly in the first lecture about this theme of nostos, uh, or homecoming as a theme of the Odyssey. So these are the opening lines, and we are introduced to Odysseus here. But as I said, the first four books don't show us Odysseus. They say, let's sing about the adventures of Odysseus, but the first four books present his son Telemachus. And they focus on this concept of, in Greek, known as Xenia. So the best translation we can probably come up with is the guest-host relationship, a clumsy formulation. There's really no one word that can translate this concept of Xenia that was operative in ancient Greece. Why is it so difficult a concept? Because at the root of that word is this, of the word Xenia, is the word xenos, which can mean at the same time guest, host, stranger, friend, and foreigner. So if in the original Greek someone said, oh, welcome Xenos, how do we translate that? We welcome guest, as so this is a line that Telemachus says to the goddess Athena in the form of Mentor, who arrives in the first books of the Odyssey to help guide Telemachus. Telemachus says to this goddess in disguise, he thinks it's just a wandering human, says, welcome Xenos. So at the same time, he's saying, welcome guest, I'm welcoming you as a guest. He's saying host, which obviously in this case is not operative, but he's also saying stranger, that's in effect. He's saying welcome friend. So we're going to be friends under this mutual relationship of guest host. and welcome foreigners. So all of those are operative at once. And in Xenia, it's all of those relationships and the meanings around those relationships that are operative in the word Xenia every time it's referred to here. So xenos is the root of our word xenophobia. So when people talk about a fear or hatred of strangers, phobia part, they're talking about in the modern day a phobia of foreigners. In ancient Greece, of course, the institution of Xenia cultivated a sort of xenophilia, a friendship among strangers and foreigners. So again, it's not based on genuine, like what we would understand as friendship in terms of kind of intimately knowing one another and knowing one's background, having gone through a lot of experiences together. It's more of a ritual obligation and reciprocal sets of requirements that these two xenoi, the plural of xenos, are to perform with one another. And it works only if both sides do not violate the terms of Xenia. So there's a divine sanction for this Xenia. Zeus, the highest god in ancient Greece, is one of his aspects is Zeus Xenios, the god who protects strangers. So if we think about what's happening here, if we have a stranger who comes from another town, he comes to your door and says hello, presents himself as a xenos. One is obligated to take that stranger in, provide a meal, provide shelter, and this only works if we can trust that the stranger's not going to rob the person, kill them in the middle of the night, what have you. So in this sense, it goes beyond hospitality. So normally, that sometimes could be one way of translating Xenia would be hospitality. And it falls short of that in the sense that our modern notion of hospitality doesn't have this kind of divine sanction behind it. Like there isn't the notion that there would be a God who would punish those who break this kind of relationship. Also, hospitality doesn't properly um, also doesn't properly indicate that there are obligations on the part of the guest as well. Okay, so in Xenia, the guest is to perform is to behave in a certain way. Again, be a good guest and not, as I said, rob, steal, but also to give gifts at the end of this relationship to the host. So it is a mutual giving as part of this Xenia. So in the legend of the Trojan War and in the Odyssey, we see Xenia as kind of sparking a lot of the events and as a real driver of some of the plot. So let's back up to what started the Trojan War in the first place. Paris and some of his Trojan comrades are in Sparta, the home of the king of Sparta, Menelaus, and his beautiful wife Helen. And Paris, being a guest there, a xenos, is obligated to obviously not violate those obligations, is obviously supposed to be a gracious guest and to give gifts and not to rob Menelaus, but he runs off with Menelaus's wife, a clear violation of Xenia. So in a sense, the whole Trojan War sparked by that event is sparked by a violation of Xenia. And we'll see many violations of Xenia in the course of the Odyssey and violations that either help or hinder Odysseus on his way home. In the first four books, we'll also see it in the form of the suitors who are pursuing Penelope in Ithaca. So the expectations, to summarize, of Xenia, they allow for travel and exchange in the Greek world. If you think about it, it's a time where if you're going to another town, it's not as though you can try to find you can't find a hotel there, you can't find a hostel or that type of thing. So you're going to travel to a foreign city, you need to find food and shelter at the home of a stranger. And you're going to find that in the first instance with someone of a relatively equal social status. And the expectation is that you are going to host members of your social status who are visiting in your city. So the host, as I said, is to invite the person in, offer food and shelter without question. And according to the convention, it's not even permissible to ask the person's name until they've been fed. So the implication being there is if you're asking the name, maybe find out that this person is associated with people you're enemies with. And in that sense, you could be implying that the hospitality in this case would be conditional upon who that person is. But according to the convention, it has to be unconditional. I don't care who you are. I'm going to host you. I'm going to provide you with shelter, with a meal, with perfect Xenia, no matter who you are. And as I said, the guest and host also are expected to exchange gifts. When we think about, I mentioned that time is one of the key themes of the entire epic of the Odyssey: time and human experience, the fact that we have a short time, and that 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 time is precious, and there can be lost time with loved ones that's irrevocable. So when we think about Xenia and time, the institution ensures a sort of contractual obligation through time that we'll have, let's say, a stability and a home, a proxy home, no matter where we go. In the Iliad, for instance, in the thick of battle, Diomedes and Glaucus are about to battle, but they first exchange information about their families, about their parents, and they realize that their ancestors have had a long tradition of Xenia between the two families. And Diomedes' grandfather had hosted Glaucus's grandfather, and they had given each other handsome gifts of friendship, it says in book 6 of the Iliad. So Diomedes says, upon realizing that, remember, they're about to battle. Diomedes and Glaucus were about to kill one another. And Diomedes, upon realizing this, says, "So now I am your host and friend in the heart of Argos. You are mine in Lycia when I visit in your country. Come, let us keep clear of each other's spears, even there in the thick of battle." So they agree to depart and not to fight one another, to fight other contingent of the enemy, with the recognition that they have reconfirmed this Xenia, this tradition of Xenia that has been happening throughout their family and has connected it through time, through generations. So this contractual relationship can ensure, as I said, a proxy home. So we'll think about that theme of Nostos, but also a way of uniting the different generations of a family and giving them a certain identity through the reciprocal relationship with another family. So, as I quickly mentioned, throughout the Odyssey, Odysseus's homecoming and getting back to his kingdom are either helped or hindered by the kinds of Xenia he meets in his journey. So he gets absolutely horrible examples of Xenia, though probably the most egregious example of Xenia with the Cyclops Polyphemus. Also, in a different sense, the negative examples of Xenia with Circe and Calypso. Calypso imprisons him on the island for 7 years. So, obviously be a good host and allow the person shelter, but don't keep them prisoner there for 7 years, would be a convention of Xenia. But he also encounters the most beneficial form of Xenia when he is hosted by the Phaeacians, who help him on his way back to Ithaca. In the first 4 books, Telemachus experiences this guest-host relationship from all angles. We see him experience it from the host's perspective in books 1 and 2. The guests are the suitors in one instance who go beyond the bounds of propriety. They're eating him out of house and home. They're pursuing this suit of Penelope without it being reciprocated. They refuse to leave. They're not providing any guest gifts in return. Telemachus, so that's kind of, let's say, negative notion of Xenia from the host perspective. As I said, he also hosts Athena in the form of Mentor, a human character. And in that case, we have this positive example of the host-guest relationship. We also see positive examples of Xenia that Telemachus experiences from the guest perspective in books 3 and 4. In books 3 and 4, at the urging of Athena, Telemachus goes to try to find news of Odysseus, first at Pylos, the court of Nestor, a colleague of Odysseus's, and then to Sparta, the court of Menelaus. And in both cases, he's hosted grandly and with all propriety, according to Xenia. So in book 1, as I mentioned, Athena appears to Telemachus in disguise. This is an example of theoxenia, so an example of a guest-host relationship between a disguised god and a human. Telemachus shows impeccable Xenia on the host side. And in this theoxenia, in those scenes, as I said, this happens in not just in the Odyssey, but other works as well. Human beings are almost tested by the gods, tested in terms of their virtue and piety, whether or not they will extend hospitality to this humble stranger that appears at their door, the Xenos. And then it turns out that it's a disguised deity who will either bless, the human who's extended hospitality, or curse the one who had turned them away. So we see this even in Hebrew literature. If you look at Genesis chapter 18, where Abraham receives God and 2 messengers in disguise. So it's in the context of Xenia that we see the true characters of the suitors. So this is something that's important to reflect upon in relation to the end of the epic. So at the end of the epic, Odysseus is going to slay all the suitors. And this seems to some modern critics an extreme course of action. I think, however, in the context of the epic, we are meant, as people reading this or hearing this, we are meant to see the suitors as irretrievably evil. We see them at the beginning of the Odyssey as violating not just Xenia but other standards of society. But it's first within this context of Xenia that they're seen as outside all bounds of social protocol. So Telemachus calls a council of the leaders of Ithaca, and he directly accuses the suitors of violating Xenia. He doesn't put it in those terms of violating Xenia. It's more in terms of not being proper guests, and not of eating him out of house and home, and not giving gifts in return. So he refers to all the conventions of Xenia without saying the word explicitly. He's backed up by the old prophet Laertes, who predicts misfortune for the suitors if they do not mend their ways. And then a spokesperson for the suitors, Eurymachus, makes it clear how the suitors don't care about Xenia or any of the other mores of society. So and if we turn to his speech now, this is Eurymachus responding to Laertes. "Stop, old man. Eurymachus, Polybus' son, rose up to take him on. Go home and babble your omens to your own children. Save them from some catastrophe coming soon. I'm a better hand than you at reading portents. Flocks of birds go fluttering under the sun's rays. Not all are fraught with meaning. Odysseus, he's dead now, far from home. Would to God you died with him too. We'd have escaped your droning prophecies then, and the way you've loosed the dogs of this poor boy's anger. Your eyes peeled for a house gift he might give you. So here, Eurymachus and Eurymachus by extension, all of the suitors are disrespecting, in some sense, all of the highest standards of Greek society. So he's disrespecting an elder. Laertes is an elder member of the community, and in most traditional societies, there's a unwritten rule of needing to respect one's elders. He does not respect his elders here. He does not respect his rightful king. So he says he wishes, or he assumes that Odysseus is dead, and that's a good thing. And so he's disrespecting his rightful king. He's disrespecting, even if he assumes Odysseus is dead, then Telemachus would be his rightful king. And what does he think about Telemachus? Not much. He thinks the same as he does of Laertes and uh, 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 of and Odysseus. He disrespects the prophetic arts, so the divining uh, of the intentions of the gods through these prophetic means. He thinks that that's all bunk. He doesn't respect any of that, so he's also disrespecting divine authority. So just about every way in which one can disrespect the highest standards of society, the suitors are displaying it here in the first books. And as I said, I think we're meant to see in this uh, the way in which, first of all, these suitors in particular are completely beyond the pale of human endeavor and need to be corrected. And the only way they're going to be corrected, it's not as though you can file a complaint with the police. They need to be corrected by Odysseus when he gets back in a violent way. And it also demonstrates something we mentioned in the first lecture, the sorry state of society in the absence of the fathers who've left to go to the Trojan War. They've either died in the Trojan War or died on their journeys home. So this is a generation of sons who've lived without fathers, who've lived without a rightful ruler to rule Ithaca. In the absence of that proper rule and proper paternal guidance, society is crumbling in Ithaca. So as I mentioned, we see this negative aspect of Xenia in the first two books in the form of the suitors. We then are presented with Xenia working properly. Telemachus, as in the role of a guest, goes to Pylos to visit first Nestor, then goes to Sparta to visit Menelaus. In book 3, he visits Nestor at Pylos, and Nestor receives him properly, as a good host should. Nestor suggests that Telemachus should visit Menelaus next, and he does, of course, in the next book. He provides Telemachus with horses and a chariot so he can make the journey, and Nestor's son Pisistratus joins Telemachus as a traveling companion. But first, before he departs to visit Menelaus, Nestor recounts events after the fall of Troy. He talks about the homecoming of other Greek heroes, although he doesn't know what happened to Odysseus. And he describes an important story that becomes emblematic throughout the Odyssey, the story of Agamemnon's murder at the hands of his wife Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus. So, and how Nestor emphasizes the story. So there's a lot going on in the story in relationship to the story in the Odyssey. So it can be a parallel story to that of the Odyssey. Agamemnon had gone to the Trojan War, obviously. He'd been gone for 10 years. He was the leader of the Greek contingent in the Trojan War. He comes home. His wife Clytemnestra had taken a lover Aegisthus, and they plotted to kill him on his return. So she does so, and his son, Agamemnon's son, Orestes, avenges this murder by killing his mother and the lover Aegisthus. So obviously the parallel here is Odysseus has been gone for now 20 years, the length of the Trojan War, 10 years, and has been wandering 10 years. There is the fear that his wife, Penelope, is maybe in league with one of these suitors who has been pursuing her for a few years. Maybe she has also been unfaithful, like Clytemnestra. Maybe she too is plotting to murder Odysseus should he return. And if that were the case, the onus would be on, and this is the implication that Nestor's drawing from this story, the onus would be on Telemachus to be like Orestes, to stand up for the rights of his father, to avenge himself on the suitors and Penelope. It's not said explicitly, but the implication being if Penelope happened to be in league with the suitors. So this story is repeated over and over. Odysseus later on, when he travels to the underworld, meets Agamemnon. Agamemnon says, beware, even Penelope, this could happen to you. So it becomes a repeated fear, let's say an emblematic warning for the characters in the Odyssey. In book 4, we see Telemachus arrive in Sparta, where he's welcomed by Menelaus and Helen. So Menelaus and Helen have returned. Menelaus and the Greeks have conquered Troy. Menelaus has won Helen back. He's returned to his home in Sparta with Helen, and they appear to be kind of living in a relative domestic peace there. As they sit around, Helen tells a story about how she helped Odysseus once during the Trojan War. The implication being Helen, I guess, is presenting herself as, I was taken against my will. I was in Troy, sure, but every chance I had, when Odysseus snuck into Troy, I helped him because that's where my heart was, of course, was with the Greeks. And Menelaus counters with a story. That's funny. That's an interesting story, Helen. But I also remember when we were inside the Trojan horse, how you walked outside the Trojan horse, imitating the voices of our wives, attempting to get us to make a sound and betray that we were in there. And if it wasn't for Odysseus, who was wise enough to tell us to keep quiet, we all would have died inside that Trojan horse. So yeah, you're right. That is a good story about how good Odysseus is. He was so good that he was able to see through your ruse that was trying to get us all killed. So interesting, say, story between Menelaus and Helen there. Much speculation about Helen, this mysterious figure in all epics, mythology, and later tragedies and other works. And let's say, at least in the Homeric representation, always enigmatic. What's difficult to pin down, really, was she taken by Paris against her will? Was she willingly there? Difficult to pin her down. And then finally, Menelaus recounts his conversation with the sea god Proteus, a god who's able to take many shapes. And Menelaus was able to hold him down and said he would not release him until he was told his future. And he tells him about the deaths of Ajax the Lesser and Agamemnon, and about Odysseus's captivity on Calypso's island. So this is how Menelaus finds out, and then Menelaus relays that to Telemachus, the fact that Odysseus was still alive as recently as a few years ago, was captive on Calypso's island, but more recent information is still lacking about Odysseus's whereabouts. So I'll end it there. That's our summary of the first 4 books, the theme of Xenia. In our next lecture, we will talk about book 5, where we first meet Odysseus on Calypso's island. Thank you.